Most people haven't actually read the Bible from cover to cover, and those who have often stumble upon passages that are confusing and difficult to understand. Even when the Bible is being taught, these passages often get skipped over because they're just too hard to explain. Yet, even though these texts might seem unusual, they actually hold hidden meanings. Today, we're going to be looking at 10 of the strangest passages in the Bible and what they might actually mean. So, let's dive right in. 1. The stones that allow conversations with God. In the Bible, there are these mysterious stones called the Urim and Thummim that show up in a few different places. These weren't just any stones. They were carefully kept in the high priest's garments, held close to his heart. The priest would carry them inside the breastplate of judgment, which was a special piece of clothing worn over the chest. The main reason for having the Urim and Thummim was to directly ask God what to do. The Bible talks about them being used a lot. In the book of Samuel, David was running away from King Saul, who was trying to kill him. While David was out in the wilderness, he heard that the Philistines were attacking the city of Keilah and stealing from their grain stores. David knew he had to do something, but he also wanted to get God's advice first. David called for Abiathar, the priest, who had the ephod. That's the sacred garment that held the Urim and Thummim. When David found out that Saul was planning to attack him, he told Abiathar, "Bring the ephod here." Then, David asked God very specific questions using this method. First, he asked, "Should I go and attack these Philistines?" And God answered, "Go and attack the Philistines and rescue Keilah." But David's men got scared when they heard what God said. So, David asked God to confirm it one more time. After God told him again that he would help, David and his men went to Keilah, fought the Philistines, and saved the people. But that wasn't the only time they used the Urim and Thummim. Later, when Saul was planning to go to Keilah to capture David, David used the Urim and Thummim again. David asked, "Will Saul come down to Keilah like I've heard?" And God said, "Yes, he will come down." Then David asked, "Will the people of Keilah betray me and my men to Saul?" And God answered, "They will betray you." Because of this mysterious guidance from the Urim and Thummim, David and his men were able to get away from Keilah just in time, avoiding being captured by Saul. But King Saul himself also used this direct line to God when he was chasing after David. And the result was pretty shocking. His own son, Jonathan, was found guilty of breaking a royal order. During a big battle against the Philistines, Saul had made his army take an oath, saying, "Cursed be anyone who eats anything before evening, before I've gotten revenge on my enemies." But Jonathan didn't know about his father's oath. He found a honeycomb in the forest, and because he was tired from fighting, he ate a little honey to get his strength back. Later, Saul wanted to ask God, through the Urim and Thummim, if they should keep fighting the Philistines that night. But God didn't answer him. This silence from God really bothered Saul. He thought it meant that someone had sinned and broken their connection with God. Saul was determined to find out who was guilty. So, he turned to the Urim and Thummim. He declared that even if his own son, Jonathan, was the one who had done wrong, he would have to die. The Urim and Thummim first picked out Saul and Jonathan from the rest of the people and then clearly pointed to Jonathan. Then Saul said, "We'll draw lots between me and my son Jonathan." And the lot fell on Jonathan. It turned out that Jonathan had unknowingly tasted honey, breaking his father's oath without meaning to. Saul felt like he had to keep his word and follow the sacred decision, so he sentenced his son to death. "Jonathan, you must die," the king declared. But the people remembered how brave Jonathan had been and the great victory he had won for Israel that day. They stood up and pleaded with Saul to spare him. They reminded Saul that Jonathan had worked with God to achieve this great victory. So, they rescued Jonathan, and he didn't die. This dramatic story shows how seriously they took oaths and sacred inquiries back then. 2. A talking donkey speaks with the seer Balaam. The prophet Balaam was asked by the king of Moab to put a curse on the nation of Israel, who had set up camp near his borders. As Balaam was traveling, riding his donkey and with 2 servants, an angel of the Lord showed up on the path ahead. The angel had a sword drawn, but Balaam couldn't see him. The donkey, however, could see the angel clearly. The first time the donkey saw the angel, she went off the road and into a field. Balaam didn't understand why, so he hit the donkey to get her back on the path. Soon after, the angel stood in a narrow path between 2 vineyards with walls on both sides. When the donkey saw the angel again, she pressed herself against one of the walls, crushing Balaam's foot. Balaam was furious and hit her again. The third time, the angel stood in an even narrower spot, leaving no way around. Seeing the angel, the donkey just laid down under Balaam. Balaam got even angrier and hit the donkey harder than before with his staff. At that very moment, something amazing happened. The Lord opened the donkey's mouth, and she said to Balaam, "What have I done to you that you've struck me these 3 times?" Balaam, in his anger, even started talking back to the animal. But then, the Lord let Balaam see the angel. Then the Lord opened Balaam's eyes, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the path with his sword drawn. Immediately, Balaam bowed down and fell on his face. Balaam knelt and put his face to the ground. The angel scolded him for being cruel to the animal who had saved his life by turning aside. He reminded Balaam that his way was wrong in God's eyes. 3. The handwriting on the wall. In the grand palace of Babylon, King Belshazzar threw a huge party for 1,000 of his nobles, wives, and concubines. In the middle of all the drunken partying, Belshazzar did something really disrespectful. He ordered that the gold and silver cups that his predecessor, Nebuchadnezzar, had taken from the temple of God in Jerusalem be brought out. The king and his guests used these holy cups to make toasts, praising their idols made of gold, silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. But at the height of the celebration, something mysterious happened, and everyone was terrified. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the fingers of a human hand appeared before everyone's eyes. The fingers started writing strange, cryptic words on the plaster of the palace wall, lit up by a nearby lamp. The words written were Mene Mene Tekel Parsin. King Belshazzar was terrified. His face turned pale, and he was so scared that his legs got weak and his knees were knocking together. The king quickly called for all his wise men, magicians, Chaldeans, and astrologers, promising them great rewards if they could read the writing and explain what it meant. But none of them, despite all their supposed wisdom, could figure out the message. In the middle of this confusion, the Queen Mother remembered Daniel, a prophet who had been known since Nebuchadnezzar's time for his divine insight. Daniel was brought before the king, and he refused the offered rewards. He went on to reveal God's judgment. The words written were Mene Mene Tekel Parsin. Daniel explained them like this: Mene, God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found lacking. Parsin, your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and Persians. God's judgment was quick and final. That very night, just as Daniel had predicted, Belshazzar, king of the Chaldeans, was killed, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom. This event stands as a serious reminder of God's power over earthly kingdoms and his judgment against arrogance and disrespect. 4. The prohibition against boiling a young goat in its mother's milk. There's this one biblical rule that has really made scholars curious. It shows up 3 different times in the Old Testament, specifically in Exodus and Deuteronomy. It's clearly stated as, do not cook a young goat in its mother's milk. It's interesting because instead of being a general rule about what you can and can't eat, it's very specific. It forbids cooking a young goat in the milk of its own mother. The original meaning behind this rule has led to a lot of different ideas. Some Bible scholars think it was meant to go against pagan rituals that might have involved cooking animals this way for superstitious reasons or for fertility ceremonies. Other scholars believe the rule was meant to encourage compassion and respect for nature and the bond between a mother and her offspring. It forbids a practice that would seem cruel or insensitive, using the very food meant to keep the offspring alive to cook it. This rule is repeated a few times in the Torah and is a basic part of Jewish dietary laws, setting the stage for the strict separation between eating meat and dairy products. 5. Moses sees the back of God. In the book of Exodus, Moses asked to see God's glory. He had been talking to God a lot and felt very close to him, so he made this bold request: "Please show me your glory." God's answer was serious. He told Moses that he would pass before him so that Moses could sense his presence. But he also gave a very important warning: "You cannot see my face, for no one may see me and live." However, in an amazing act of kindness toward his servant, God let Moses have a special experience. He allowed Moses to see his back. To do this, God told Moses to stand on a rock. He explained, "When my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft in the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed. Then I will remove my hand, and you will see my back, but my face will not be seen." So, protected by God's hand in the rock, Moses saw a glimpse of God's presence, described as his back. This way of describing God has made people think a lot about what it really means. What exactly did Moses see? The text doesn't say exactly, leaving the real nature of this vision a mystery. The common understanding of this passage is that no human can look at God's face and survive because his majesty is just too overwhelming. But God was gracious enough to give Moses a way to see a little bit of his glory without being destroyed. 6. Jesus writes in the sand and contradicts the Old Testament. The Old Testament lays out strict punishments for certain sins. In an effort to create an orderly society under God's rules, stoning, where the community throws stones at someone until they die, was the ultimate punishment for serious offenses. Crimes like blasphemy, idolatry, witchcraft, or sexual sins like adultery could lead to this sentence. The idea was to get rid of evil from among the people and uphold the holiness of their agreement with God. A clear example of this is in the book of Numbers. While the Israelites were wandering in the desert, a man was caught gathering wood on the Sabbath, which was against the law. They brought the man to Moses, who asked God what to do. God's instructions were clear. The man was to be stoned to death by the whole community outside the camp. And so it was done, following God's command exactly. This story shows how seriously they took obedience to God's law back then. But when we get to the New Testament, we see a big change in how this punishment is viewed thanks to Jesus. In the Gospel of John, we hear about the time when the scribes and Pharisees brought a woman to Jesus who had been caught in the act of adultery. They put her in front of the crowd, pointed out that the law of Moses said such women should be stoned, and asked Jesus what he thought should be done. Instead of answering right away, Jesus calmly bent down and started writing in the dust with his finger, as if he hadn't heard them. When they kept pressing him for an answer, he stood up and said something that's still famous today: "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." Then he bent down again and kept writing in the dirt. Ashamed, her accusers started walking away, one by one, starting with the oldest, until only Jesus and the woman were left standing. Jesus stood up and, seeing that no one was left but the woman, asked her, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" "No one, sir," she said. "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." With this act, Jesus openly challenged the teachings of the Old Testament. He brought in a new idea of compassion, giving the woman a chance to change and start over instead of condemning her as the law said. 7. Jesus curses and withers a fig tree. The Gospel of Mark tells us about a strange thing Jesus did. He cursed a fig tree. This happened in the days leading up to his crucifixion, when Jesus and his disciples were walking from Bethany to Jerusalem. The story says that Jesus was hungry. He saw a fig tree in the distance that was covered in leaves, which seemed to mean it had early fruit. He went up to it to see if he could find anything to eat. But when he got there, he found nothing but leaves. Because the tree was bare, Jesus spoke harsh words to it: "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." What's really odd about this is that Mark himself explains it wasn't the season for figs, but when he got there he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. His disciples heard him say this. The next morning, when they walked by again, they saw that the fig tree had withered from the roots. Naki's account says that the disciples were shocked to see this happen so quickly. Jesus' action of cursing this tree because it didn't have any fruit, especially when the gospel itself says it wasn't the season for figs, has confused a lot of people and led to different explanations. It's clear that this wasn't just Jesus being angry because he was hungry. It was a symbolic act with a deeper meaning. Scholars and theologians often point out that, in the Old Testament, the fig tree was often used to represent the nation of Israel. So, a fig tree that was full of leaves, promising fruit, but not actually producing any, can be seen as representing the spiritual condition of much of Israel at the time of Jesus, especially its religious leaders. They had an outward show of godliness and faith, but they often lacked genuine spiritual fruit. Jesus' arrival in Jerusalem and his sadness over the city's spiritual state happened around the same time, which supports the idea of divine judgment on spiritual emptiness. 8. The second death after hell. The Bible describes the final, eternal fate of those who completely reject God and continue to do evil. It's shown as a place burning with fire and sulfur, which represents total and final punishment, often called the second death. This place is mentioned several times in the Bible, along with descriptions of who will end up there. The first mention is after the great final battle, often called Armageddon, as described in Revelation. It clearly says that the beast and the false prophet, who tricked the world into worshiping the beast, are captured. The text specifically says these two were thrown alive into a lake of burning fire, and the beast was captured, and with it the false prophet, the two of them were thrown alive into the fiery lake of burning sulfur. Later, in Revelation 20, After a 1,000-year period where Satan is locked away, the Bible says that the devil is released for a short time and again tricks nations into a final rebellion against God. However, his defeat is complete. The passage says that the devil himself will join the beast and the false prophet in the lake of fire and brimstone, and the devil who deceived them was thrown into the lake of burning sulfur where the beast and the false prophet had been thrown. They will be tormented day and night forever and ever. After the judgment before the great white throne, where the dead are judged based on their actions, and the book of life is opened, Revelation reveals one final, awe-inspiring act. Death itself and Hades are thrown into the lake of fire. This means the final end of death as a ruling power. It also clearly states that anyone whose name was not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. This group includes the cowardly and unbelieving, the detestable and murderers, the sexually immoral and sorcerers, the idolaters and all liars. They will have their share in the lake burning with fire and brimstone. This is the second death. It is specifically described as the second death. The lake of fire is presented as the ultimate and everlasting consequence. 9. The mysterious being Melchizedek. The Bible talks about a being who has no father, no mother, no family history, and no beginning or end. It seems impossible, but this mysterious figure shows up suddenly, blesses Abraham, and then disappears. Melchizedek is a figure who appears briefly in the book of Genesis, but he's very important, especially as highlighted in the letter to the Hebrews. His appearance is as sudden as it is meaningful, leaving behind a sense of mystery that has fascinated Bible scholars for a long time. The story happens after Abraham comes back victorious from a battle to rescue his nephew Lot. At that moment, Melchizedek, the priest of God Most High, came out to greet Abraham. He didn't bring any war tributes, but instead offered bread and wine, which are symbols of nourishment and fellowship. Then Melchizedek blessed Abraham in the name of God Most High. Abraham, recognizing Melchizedek's spiritual authority, gave him 1/10 of all the spoils. After this sudden interaction, Melchizedek abruptly disappears from the story in Genesis. Then Melchizedek blessed him, saying, "Blessed be Abram by God, Most High, Creator of heaven and earth." The mystery gets deeper because Melchizedek doesn't appear again until much later in the New Testament, in the letter to the Hebrews. There, he's described in a unique way. For this Melchizedek, priest of God Most High, who met Abraham and blessed him, whose name means King of Righteousness, having neither father nor mother nor genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life, resembling the Son of God, he remains a priest forever. This description doesn't necessarily mean that Melchizedek was a heavenly or non-human being. It means that the Bible deliberately leaves out his ancestry and descendants. This lack of earthly family history is important because it allows Melchizedek to better represent the eternal priesthood held by Jesus Christ. So Melchizedek, whose name means King of Righteousness, is introduced to us as a real historical figure who served as both king and priest of the true God in very early times. 10. The wheels covered in eyes. The book of the prophet Ezekiel begins with one of the most complicated visions ever recorded in the Bible. It's described in chapters 1 and 10 of Ezekiel. His vision started with a violent whirlwind, an immense cloud, and a brilliant fire that radiated brightness all around. From within this fire came 4 living creatures with extraordinary appearances. Each one had a general human shape, but they had 4 different faces: the face of a man in the front, a lion's face on the right side, an ox's face on the left, and an eagle's face at the back. Each creature also had 4 wings, 2 spread upward touching each other, while the other 2 covered their bodies. Their legs were straight, and their feet looked like calves' hooves, gleaming like polished bronze. Beneath their wings, on all 4 sides, they had human hands. They moved forward with unwavering determination, always straight ahead, never needing to turn. Next to each of these living beings was an amazing wheel intersected by another wheel within it, looking like gyroscopic spheres that could quickly move in any of the 4 directions. These wheels shone brightly, and their rims were completely covered with eyes. This was, in the prophet's words, the vision of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. This vision, with its complicated imagery of angelic beings, all-seeing wheels, and indescribable divine glory, has intrigued and mystified interpreters for centuries. It symbolizes God's omniscience and transcendent mobility. 11. The creatures Leviathan, Behemoth, and Urim. The Bible presents a fascinating collection of creatures, some majestic and frightening, others symbolic and mysterious. These beings sometimes highlight God's creative power or, in some cases, represent the forces of chaos and desolation. In the book of Job, God himself describes Leviathan. It's portrayed as a colossal sea creature covered with impenetrable scales, tightly joined like shields, and from its nostrils smoke pours forth. No human weapon can subdue it. Its heart is as firm as a millstone, and its passage through the sea leaves behind a luminous trail. The Psalms also mention it as a creature with whom God plays in the vast waters. The prophet Isaiah also speaks of it, saying, "In that day the Lord will punish with his fierce, great, and mighty sword Leviathan, the swift serpent Leviathan, the twisting serpent, and he will slay the dragon that lives in the sea." Leviathan embodies the raw, primal strength of creation and God's immeasurable dominion over the forces of chaos. Just before describing Leviathan in Job 40, God introduces Behemoth. "Behold now Behemoth, says the Lord whom I made, just as I made you, he feeds on grass like an ox." Behemoth is portrayed with tremendous strength in his loins and powerful muscles in his belly, swinging his tail like a cedar tree. His bones are like bars of bronze, and his limbs like rods of iron. While some have tried to identify Behemoth with familiar animals such as the hippopotamus or elephant, the biblical portrayal grants it qualities far exceeding these creatures, presenting it as an extraordinary masterpiece of God's creative power on the earth, a majestic creature that only its maker can tame. The Urim, mentioned throughout various passages of the Old Testament, such as in Numbers, Job, and the Psalms, symbolizes an animal of immense strength and ferocious power. Some older translations, including the King James Version, rendered it as unicorn, sparking abundant curiosity. However, modern scholarship strongly suggests that the Urim actually refers to a now extinct wild ox known for its immense size and strength. The Bible uses this creature to illustrate the powerful might of God and his unique ability to subdue the forces of nature. In Job 39, God asks rhetorically, "Will the Urim consent to serve you? Will it spend the night by your manger? Can you bind the ram?" If these passages intrigued you, get ready for part 2. Here's the English translation and rewrite. Get ready, because what you've witnessed so far is just scratching the surface. There are far greater enigmas buried within the Bible. Even something as seemingly straightforward as a simple list of names from the Bible can actually hold a divinely coded message, a profound statement hidden in plain sight. Click on the video on your screen right now if you want to reveal this hidden message and discover even more mind-blowing secrets.